So let's start ourselves off again with another box, another cube even. I'm going to use some of the tools in here to set things up. So I'm going to go to Polycube and I would like to have a look at getting this to be the right size. Now there's no absolute right or wrong, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just have a look at the texture map I'm dealing with. And I'm going to work with this brick wall texture. It's a pretty big texture. As you can see, it's pretty much a 4K texture. It's not quite 4K, but I've put that in there as an indication. It's actually 3840 by 2400. Okay, so it's about, you could almost say it's like 3:2. It's not quite, it's a little bit more than that, but we'll say we'll say a 3:2. It'll do in terms of ratio. It's about right. So we'll say about 3:2. All right, so that's the texture map we're going to apply to this. Okay, so let's say that the height then would be 2. Or rather, the height would be 2, sorry, and the depth would be about 3. Okay, so we end up with something that looks a bit like that. I'm just going to plonk it on the top there. And if we wanted our so just go back in here again. If we wanted this to have some further depth this way, we could of course do that, and we could maybe make it 3 that way as well. And then what we'll do is we'll apply that texture map to this, and then we'll have a look at some of the issues with this this map here. We'll have a look at something. I've just accidentally renamed it, so let me go in again. So some of the issues that we've got with this. So we'll get that applied now and see what happens. So remember, what we do is we go into our hypershade. I'm going to set up a brand new one, by the way. I've wiped out my last one. So just as a reminder to you, we'll set up a brand new texture map. So remember, we went into Arnold, shader, then surface, and then standard surface. So we'll build ourselves a new standard Arnold surface, and then we'll put A for Arnold. I like to put that in there, and then we'll say this is going to be wall texture. Call it what you will, doesn't really matter, so we'll do that. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to look at is again putting the colour in there. File, we'll load up our file, and we're going to go into our brick wall texture. We'll open that one up, you can see it on there, and we'll apply that to our object. So right click, existing material, here wall texture, that's the new one, that's the old one, that's the new one. Make sure you've got this turned on, otherwise you will not see any texture. We can see it on there, it's working reasonably well. That clearly is not the entire texture map. You can see in there, it's a huge square texture map, and it's kind of not tiled it very effectively onto here. So let's go back into our UV toolkit, and we're going to use a different one this time. We're going to use, I'll try automatic, and what that's done, it's projected it from each side. I'm not happy with the way it's actually projected it in terms of the orientation, so let's try another few examples. Do planar, of course, will just give us one end. I actually quite like to have this both sides. Let's have a look, see what we could use instead. We'll use best plane. Select that one, hold down shift and select this one, and then we'll press return. Let's try that again. Don't know why it's not allowing me to do both of those. Should do. Press return. I'll try and do it on that one instead. Turn. There we go. I don't know why I didn't do it last time. But anyway, we did it both sides. So select that one. So best plane. Select that one. Press return. Select this one. Press return, and then we got it both sides. It's a little bit easier to see how the texture wraps onto there. So that is the entire texture map, which is on there now. I'll just prove it. That is the texture map. Yep, so we can see it on there. Now the next thing, as I usually say, is to have a look at how this thing would tile effectively. So let's go into Attribute Editor. We'll select the object, of course. Let me just make sure we're in object mode and not face mode or anything. We're going to go into the texture, wall texture, into the colour, not the file but the placement of that, and then we'll have a look at what would happen if we did put some sort of repeating UV in there. So I'm just going to go 2, and I'll also go by 2, something like that. And you can see there where our errors might be. So you can see this thing clearly is not tileable. It's not seamless. The thing doesn't quite match up. In fact, not only does it not match up in terms of brickwork, it actually seems to drop down below the next side, or rather the next side's higher up than this, which suggests that perhaps these lines are not completely parallel, or indeed not completely horizontal. Also, if we look at where these two match in the middle section somewhere, if I can find where they match in the middle, there is also a disparity somewhere between this match in the middle here. In fact, we can see it there. Okay, so you can see this brickwork, and I think that's called a Flemish bond in brickwork, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong, but I think it is. You can see there's an issue there. It doesn't tile properly. We've not got half the brick section here and so on. Okay, so the tile in there has not worked too well. Okay, now let me go back into here again. Unfortunately, it closed itself back down again. And we can see the repeat is not quite working. In fact, I think there might also be an offset on this somewhere along the lines, because our repeat seems to have happened halfway down rather than I've got 3/4 of the way down rather than halfway down. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point of this was to prove that it actually doesn't tile very well. It's not seamless. So the next thing we will do is have a look at how we could make it seamless. So we're going to take that texture map, we're going to drop it into Photoshop, we're going to do some things with it, and then we'll see if we can fix it up. Okay, so we'll leave this on because it's going to be good to be able to come back to it. We'll leave it on like that. It's like a corner of our building or something of that sort. We'll then go into Photoshop. We'll load up that texture. Unfortunately, that seems to take precedent over the front. But so we're going to open our texture. We'll go to open our brickwork, or brick wall rather. We'll open that up. It's quite a large file, so it might take a little bit of opening. Okay, now the tools you're going to need for this are relatively simple, but we'll try and work through it anyway, just to help you along. Now, the first thing I mentioned was this idea that these lines are probably not exactly horizontal, which is why when we had the left side, it didn't match up with the right side. Okay, now the easiest way of checking that is to do the following thing. Now, first of all, I will notice that the crop has automatically engaged itself when I've opened this up. Don't know why that is, so we'll cancel the crop. If yours has done the same, just cancel it. Okay, now the next thing that I would do is, if you go to view and make sure you can see rulers, it will then allow you to pull out a line from the top, and it's just a guideline. And if we use that guideline to check our horizontals here, and I'm going to do this at a few kind of fairly arbitrary points down my brickwork, we get to see just how well the left side and the right side are going to match up. And I'm going to zoom in, so I'm just going to use, for me it's Command and plus because I'm on a Mac, for you it'll be Control plus, and I'm going to use the Shift key, or rather the Space key, to be able to pan around. Okay, so if we look here, I'm just going to drag that down so it falls right across the middle of that black line. As you work our way along, look, it's actually dropping below the black line. It's a little bit up and down. It's fairly straight, but we have got a problem here. It's slightly above. Let's have a look at this one. Move our way down. Again, slightly above where I left this on the left hand side, which is pretty much central to the middle of that line. So we're just using these guidelines to help us along. Again, I'm just going to pop that in there. Now, yes, the brickwork's not going to be absolutely perfect, but we can see probably more than anything on this one how quickly it starts to fall away. This one is nowhere near horizontal. You can see that. That's where we're going to get disparity in the matchup, the left and the right side. Okay, so let's zoom out and let's see what we can do about that. Okay, so we'll turn off those guidelines. Oh, in fact, we'll keep them on because it's going to be useful to be able to see if we can match things up and so on. So a couple of things. Remember when we looked in Maya, we had the issue of the top bricks being exactly the same kind of orientation spacing as the bottom bricks. So I would suggest we crop off the bottom section anyway. So we start with full brick, and at the bottom we end up with half brick to the left hand side. That will mean that the top and the bottom will match up better. So we'll go into the crop tool, we'll crop that down. I want to crop it based on the left hand side. It will snap automatically to my guideline because I've got a guideline in there. So make sure your guideline is a good one, let's say. Now the thing I would however suggest is that in doing this, make sure that I'm going to bring my guideline, in fact not the guideline, I'm just going to bring my crop to just below the black element where the mortar would sit in there, something like that. Now I'm going to press the return key and that will crop. Okay. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my ruler line there, or my guideline, up to the next available section, because it's going to be too confusing to try and match the bottom one. And I'm going to use a tool which lets me play around with well, basically skew or de-skew this image. So the idea, of course, is if you're taking your own images, you need to be photographing them as flat on as possible to the wall or to the woodwork or whatever it is you're photographing, not at an angle, not with any distortion. Perhaps there might be some lens distortion or something from the camera lens, so you would try and de-skew that. So in order to make any changes to this, I'm going to have to duplicate this because this layer is currently locked. I mean, you can unlock it, but I prefer to keep a version of like an archive version of the original. So we're going to drag that one down here onto the icon there, which will duplicate it. So we've got a background copy. Then we should be able to go into these tools here, which is edit, transform, and I usually go just for scale to begin with, or you can just press Ctrl T on your keyboard or Command T if you're on a Mac, and that takes us into these tools here, which allow you to reposition things. They also allow you to rescale them. Now I'm just going to turn off the background layer, so I'm just going to come out of here, turn off the background layer so you can see what's going on. I'll go back into that tool again. Okay, so you can see there. But one of the cool things it lets you do, if you right click, it lets you access all of these elements here. So if you look at something like skew, it lets you sort of de-skew things and tidy up some of the angles that you've got to work with there. Now it will try and snap if you're not careful, which it's trying to do there. So I'm going to hold down the Control key, which should mean it won't try and snap. I'm just going to try and tidy up that straight line there. Don't worry about the bottom of the brickwork, we're going to bring that back, but I've kind of tidied up that bottom line there. Now has that any impact on the top or the middle? No, I think it's just the bottom that it's tidied up there, which is good. So we're happy with it. Again, I'll tidy this stuff up, I'll add that extra element in later. In fact, probably what I should have done is not cropped it at this point. I should have de-skewed it and then cropped it, because then it would have kept those elements in. It's fine, doesn't really matter, we can bring that stuff back. Okay, so we've got that done. Now the other thing I want to look at is how the thing wraps from left to right. If you look at the moment, what we've got is we've kind of got full brick, kind of small chunk of brick, which we're expecting to wrap into this section of brick here. So it's kind of a little bit there, rest of the brick here, and so now you're going to have that to a point, but I don't like the fact that we've got the tiny little fraction here, elements of the brickwork. If we could remove those, so maybe crop at this side and maybe crop at this side to tidy up, I think that would be a good thing. So again, Control T, rather than Control T, sorry, we'll come out of that mode, is going to the crop tool. I'm going to attempt to crop in here. What's going on here? It's telling me off, it's saying my scratch discs are full, so I'll just empty those and I'll come back in a second. So we'll come back actually in the next video, I think, because this is actually getting into quite a long video, so we'll come back in the next video and we'll continue on with this.